Ma'am, whose garage are you stealing that car from? The question sliced through the warm Saturday afternoon and seemed to freeze the entire driveway in place. Alicia Brooks slowly lifted her head from beneath the raised hood of a silver Mercedes-Benz. For a brief moment, she thought she had misheard. The smell of motor oil lingered in the air. Sunlight spilled across the concrete floor of the open garage, catching tiny dust particles that drifted lazily through the heat. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed. But much closer, just a few feet away, two uniformed police officers stood at the edge of her driveway. Alicia straightened carefully, wiping her hands on a faded shop towel. Dark streaks of grease marked her fingers. Her curly hair was pulled back beneath a navy baseball cap, and her old jeans carried the familiar signs of someone who actually worked with tools instead of simply paying someone else to do it. She glanced from one officer to the other. Neither appeared relaxed. Neither appeared uncertain. In fact, they looked completely convinced they already knew exactly what was happening. Officer Ryan Mitchell stepped forward first. Young. Confident. The kind of confidence that often arrived before all the facts did. His hand rested casually near his utility belt as his eyes moved from Alicia to the luxury vehicle and back again. We received a report about a suspicious individual attempting to access a vehicle inside this property, he said. Can you explain what you're doing here? For several seconds, Alicia simply stared at him. The question itself felt almost unreal. She turned slowly and looked around her own garage. The shelves filled with tools. The workbench her father had built nearly 20 years earlier. The old framed photograph hanging near the side wall. Every inch of the space carried memories. Every inch belonged to her. I'm working on my car, she answered calmly. Ryan's expression did not change. Your car? Yes. The second officer shifted slightly behind him. A radio crackled somewhere near his shoulder. The sound echoed against the garage walls. Alicia could feel eyes watching from across the street now. Curtains moved. Front doors opened. Neighbors always seemed to appear whenever police vehicles arrived. Ryan looked toward the Mercedes. Do you have identification? Alicia nodded once. Of course. She reached toward the workbench where her wallet rested beside a socket wrench set. Ryan immediately raised a hand. Slowly, please. Alicia paused. The words hung in the air longer than they should have. She lowered her eyes briefly. Not in submission. Not in anger. Simply collecting herself. She had spent her entire professional life navigating difficult conversations. Courtrooms. Depositions. Federal investigations. Yet somehow standing inside her own garage while being questioned about belonging there felt uniquely exhausting. She retrieved her wallet and handed over her driver's license. Ryan studied it. Then studied her again. Then studied the house. A large colonial-style home sitting on nearly an acre of land. The kind of property many people assumed came with a certain image attached to it. An image that apparently did not match the woman standing in front of him. Alicia Brooks, he read aloud. This is your address? It is. The afternoon breeze stirred the oak trees lining the street. Leaves rustled softly overhead. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. Ryan continued staring at the license. Then back at Alicia. His skepticism remained. And as several more neighbors gathered quietly near the sidewalk, Alicia began to realize this misunderstanding was only getting started. Alicia could feel the attention growing with every passing second. The small crowd near the sidewalk had doubled now. A man walking his dog had stopped. Two teenagers stood beside a mailbox pretending not to watch. Across the street, a woman held her phone low against her chest, recording discreetly. The entire neighborhood seemed caught between curiosity and silence. Ryan handed the driver's license back but did not step away. Instead, his eyes drifted toward the house once more. The white columns. The manicured lawn. The three-car garage. The kind of property that people often associated with a particular image. Alicia recognized the look immediately. She had seen it her entire life. The look that arrived before questions. Before facts. Before understanding. It was the look that quietly asked whether someone belonged where they stood. She folded the license back into her wallet and placed it carefully on the workbench. Beside it sat a small framed photograph. Her father stood smiling beside the very same Mercedes more than 20 years earlier. The picture had faded slightly around the edges, but the memory remained sharp. Her father had spent nearly 4 decades repairing engines in a small shop outside Baltimore. He taught her how to change oil before she learned algebra. He taught her that every machine told a story if someone took the time to listen. Most importantly, he taught her that dignity came from character, not titles. Alicia glanced at the photograph briefly before looking back at the officers. Ryan seemed unconvinced. "Do you have proof of ownership for the vehicle?" he asked. "Registration is inside the glove compartment," Alicia replied. "And the title is inside the house. We would like to see both." Alicia nodded calmly. "That can be arranged." Her voice never rose. Her posture never changed. The calmness seemed almost to frustrate him. Many people became defensive when questioned. Many became emotional. Alicia simply remained composed. Years of federal legal work had taught her that emotions often distracted from facts. The facts would eventually speak for themselves. A warm breeze moved through the open garage. The hanging wind chime near the side door gave a soft metallic ring. Ryan shifted his weight. "How long have you lived here?" "Almost 7 years." "Alone?" Alicia noticed the question immediately. So did the second officer, whose eyes flickered toward Ryan before quickly looking away. "That is not relevant," Alicia answered politely. For the first time, a hint of tension crossed Ryan's face. The answer had not been what he expected. Meanwhile, several houses away, Linda Parker stood near her front porch pretending to water flowers. Alicia recognized her instantly. Linda rarely spoke to her despite living nearby for years. Yet she always seemed interested in who came and went from the neighborhood. Their eyes met briefly across the street. Linda quickly looked away. Something about that reaction caught Alicia's attention. A small detail. A small clue. The kind of clue attorneys learned not to ignore. Then a sharp burst of static came through the police radio. The second officer pressed a hand against his shoulder microphone and listened. His expression changed almost immediately. He turned toward Ryan. "Dispatch is asking for an update," he said quietly. Ryan nodded without taking his eyes off Alicia. The afternoon sun lowered slightly, casting longer shadows across the driveway. The garage suddenly felt smaller than before. And although Alicia did not know it yet, somewhere inside a dispatch center downtown, a routine records check had just returned information that was about to change the entire direction of the afternoon. The second officer listened to the radio for several more seconds before lowering his hands slowly from the microphone. Something in his expression had changed. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone across the street to notice. But Alicia noticed. Years spent reading witnesses, juries, investigators, and opposing counsel had trained her to spot even the smallest shift in body language. Ryan noticed it too. "What is it?" he asked quietly. The officer hesitated. Dispatch confirmed the property ownership. Ryan nodded once. "And?" Another pause followed. The breeze moved through the trees again. A loose sheet of paper slid across the workbench and fluttered onto the garage floor. Alicia remained still. The officer lowered his voice even further. "The house is registered to Alicia Brooks." Ryan glanced toward Alicia. Then toward the house. then back toward Alicia. The information clearly did not fit whatever picture he had formed when he first arrived. Across the street, Linda Parker suddenly became very interested in the flowers she was watering. Her movements grew noticeably faster. Alicia watched her carefully. The pieces were beginning to align. Ryan cleared his throat. Property ownership does not necessarily explain the vehicle. Alicia almost smiled. Almost. Instead, she folded her shop towel neatly and set it beside a toolbox. The gesture was calm. Deliberate, controlled. The registration is available if you would like to review it, she said. Ryan nodded. Please retrieve it. Alicia walked toward the Mercedes and opened the driver's side door. The familiar scent of leather and engine cleaner greeted her. She reached into the glove compartment and removed a folder containing insurance documents, registration paperwork, and maintenance records. Her father had always believed that organizations solved problems before they started. She handed the folder over without a word. Ryan examined each page carefully. The vehicle registration matched the address. The insurance policy matched the address. The ownership records matched the address. Every document pointed to the same conclusion. Alicia Brooks owned the house. Alicia Brooks owned the car. Alicia Brooks belonged exactly where she was standing. Yet Ryan still seemed unwilling to release the assumptions he had arrived with. Who called this in? Alicia asked suddenly. Ryan looked up. Excuse me? The report. Her voice remained calm. Who contacted dispatch? Ryan did not answer immediately. Alicia already suspected she knew. She glanced toward Linda again. The woman nearly dropped her watering can when their eyes met. That reaction said more than words ever could. Several of the neighbors had begun whispering among themselves. The atmosphere on the street felt different now. Less certain. Less confident. The original story was beginning to crack. Then the radio crackled once more. This time the voice coming through sounded sharper. More urgent. The second officer listened again, and as the message continued, his eyes widened slightly. He looked toward Alicia. Then toward Ryan. Then back toward Alicia again. Ryan, he said carefully. Dispatch wants us to remain on scene. Ryan frowned. Why? The officer swallowed. Because somebody from downtown is requesting additional verification before we close the call. Ryan's jaw tightened. Additional verification for what? The answer came quietly, but it landed with surprising weight. For her professional credentials. The street fell strangely silent. Even the whispers seemed to stop. Alicia said nothing. She simply looked toward the fading afternoon sunlight stretching across her driveway and wondered how much longer it would take before the truth finally arrived. Ryan stared at the second officer as though he had misheard him. Professional credentials, he repeated. The officer nodded. That is what dispatch said. A strange silence settled over the driveway. The neighbors standing near the sidewalk exchanged uncertain glances. The confidence that had filled the street 20 minutes earlier was fading. Questions were replacing assumptions. Alicia rested one hand on the edge of the workbench and watched the scene unfold without saying a word. The afternoon sunlight reflected off the chrome trim of the Mercedes. Somewhere overhead, a pair of birds crossed the cloudless sky. Everything about the day remained peaceful except for the tension hanging in the air. Ryan folded the registration papers and handed them back. What exactly do you do for a living? He asked. Alicia met his eyes calmly. I work in public service. The answer was truthful. It was also incomplete. Ryan frowned. Can you be more specific? Alicia considered the question. She could have ended the situation immediately. She could have listed her title, her office, her years of experience. Instead, she chose patience. I work with legal matters, she said. Ryan glanced toward his partner. The response seemed only to deepen his confusion. Across the street, Linda Parker was no longer pretending to water flowers. The watering can sat abandoned beside the porch steps. Her attention remained fixed entirely on the driveway. Alicia noticed that too. Then another police vehicle appeared at the far end of the street. Its engine hummed softly as it rolled past rows of neatly maintained homes. The neighbors immediately noticed. Conversations stopped. Several people straightened. Additional officers rarely arrived for routine misunderstandings. Ryan turned toward the approaching vehicle. Who called for backup? He muttered. The second officer checked his radio again. Nobody requested backup. The vehicle slowed before stopping along the curb. A uniformed sergeant stepped out. Tall. Gray-haired. Professional. Sergeant Daniel Cooper carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades making difficult decisions. He closed the door carefully and began walking toward the driveway. The moment he arrived, he noticed the crowd. The police vehicles. The open garage. Then his gaze landed on Alicia Brooks. For the briefest moment, something changed in his expression. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. Ryan immediately approached him. Sergeant, we received a suspicious activity call involving possible vehicle theft. Cooper looked toward the Mercedes. Then toward Alicia. Then back at Ryan. Vehicle theft, he asked. Yes, sir. Cooper remained silent for several seconds. The breeze stirred the leaves overhead. A wind chime rang softly near the garage door. Finally, the sergeant spoke. Did dispatch provide the ownership records? Yes, sir. And the vehicle registration? Yes, sir. Everything matched? Ryan hesitated. Yes, sir. Cooper nodded slowly. Then he asked a question that immediately shifted the atmosphere. Did dispatch also provide the employment verification? Ryan blinked. We were told additional verification was being processed. Cooper looked directly at Alicia. She offered a polite nod in return. Nothing more. No arrogance. No frustration. No attempt to embarrass anyone. The sergeant returned the nod. Then he turned back toward Ryan. Officer Mitchell, he said carefully, before this situation goes any further, there is something you need to know. The entire street seemed to hold its breath as Ryan waited for the answer. Ryan looked at Sergeant Cooper, waiting. The older officer took a slow breath before speaking. The woman standing in front of you is not simply a homeowner whose records checked out. His voice remained calm, but every word carried weight. Ryan straightened slightly. The neighbors leaned forward. Even Linda Parker seemed frozen on her porch. Cooper continued. Miss Brooks works for the United States Department of Justice. For a moment, nobody spoke. The words drifted across the driveway like a sudden change in weather. Ryan blinked once. Then twice. Department of Justice, he repeated. Cooper nodded. Yes. Ryan glanced toward Alicia. The grease-stained jeans. The worn baseball cap. The oil marks on her hands. None of it matched the image he had unconsciously built in his mind when he first arrived. Yet standing quietly beside the Mercedes was a woman who appeared completely unaffected by the revelation. She simply folded her shop towel and rested it on the corner of the workbench. What position? Ryan finally asked. Cooper's eyes moved toward Alicia again. There was unmistakable respect in his expression now. Senior attorney. The street fell silent. One of the teenagers near the mailbox slowly lowered his phone. The man walking his dog stopped moving altogether. Across the neighborhood, curtains shifted as more people watched from their windows. Ryan swallowed. Senior attorney? Cooper nodded again. And before you ask, yes, dispatch verified everything. Ryan stared toward the driveway as though trying to make sense of two completely different realities. The first reality was the one he had assumed. The second reality was standing directly in front of him. Alicia noticed the conflict behind his eyes. She had seen it before. Many times. In courtrooms. Conference rooms. Government buildings. The moment assumptions collided with facts. It was never comfortable. The radio on Ryan's shoulder crackled softly again. Nobody reached for it. Nobody wanted to interrupt what was happening. A warm gust of wind moved through the open garage. The photograph of Alicia's father remained visible on the workbench. Cooper noticed it and smiled faintly. Your father? He asked. Alicia nodded. He taught me everything I know about engines. Cooper looked toward the Mercedes. Looks like he taught you well. A few neighbors exchanged uncertain glances. The atmosphere had changed completely now. Earlier, Alicia had been the subject of suspicion. Now she was becoming the center of an uncomfortable realization. Ryan lowered his eyes briefly. Why did dispatch request professional verification? He asked quietly. Cooper hesitated for a second before answering. Because someone in the system recognized her name. Ryan frowned. Recognized it from what? Cooper's response came immediately. Training. Ryan looked confused. Training? The sergeant nodded. Civil rights seminars. Legal compliance workshops. Department briefings. Ryan stared at Alicia again. The silence stretched. Then Cooper added one final detail. There is a very good chance that someone in this department has studied material prepared by her office. The words landed harder than anyone expected. Even Alicia seemed slightly surprised that dispatch had shared that much information. Ryan's face lost what little certainty remained. For the first time since arriving, he no longer looked like the person in control of the situation. He looked like someone realizing he had entered a conversation without understanding the people involved. And standing across the driveway, Linda Parker slowly lowered her gaze toward the ground, because she was beginning to understand that the phone call she had made was about to create consequences she never expected. For several moments nobody moved. The entire street seemed suspended in a strange stillness. The late afternoon sun hung low above the neighborhood, washing the driveways and rooftops in soft golden light. Alicia stood beside the open hood of the Mercedes while the breeze gently stirred loose strands of hair near her cap. The scent of motor oil lingered in the garage. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler clicked rhythmically across a green lawn. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. Yet everything felt different now. Ryan looked down at the pavement. The confidence that had carried him onto the property earlier had quietly disappeared. In its place was something much heavier. Reflection. He replayed the last 30 minutes in his mind. The questions. The assumptions. The certainty he had felt before seeing a single piece of evidence. Beside him, Sergeant Cooper remained silent. Experience had taught him that some lessons arrived best without additional words. Across the street, neighbors slowly began drifting back toward their homes. Not because they had lost interest, but because the story they expected had turned into something else entirely. The excitement of suspicion had been replaced by the discomfort of truth. Linda Parker remained frozen near her porch steps. She no longer looked curious. She looked uneasy. Alicia noticed it but said nothing. She had spent years in courtrooms watching people confront their own decisions. Sometimes accountability arrived through legal consequences. Sometimes it arrived through a quiet moment of self-awareness. Both could be powerful. Her eyes drifted toward the framed photograph resting on the workbench. Her father smiled back from another time. Another life. She remembered standing beside him in a crowded repair shop when she was 12 years old. One afternoon a customer had mistaken her for someone who did not belong there. She remembered the embarrassment she felt. She remembered the anger. Most of all, she remembered her father's response afterward. He had simply handed her a wrench and smiled. "Do not waste your energy proving who you are," he told her. "Spend it becoming who you are." The memory settled warmly in her chest. Years later, those words still guided her. Ryan finally looked up. His expression was no longer defensive. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly. Alicia turned toward him. "Yes, officer?" He hesitated. The pause seemed to stretch longer than any silence before it. "I should have handled this differently." The admission surprised even him. The neighbors who remained nearby pretended not to listen, but everyone heard it. Alicia studied his face. She saw embarrassment there. Regret. Perhaps even growth. None of those things arrived easily. "We all make decisions with incomplete information sometimes," she replied. Her voice remained calm and steady. "The important part is what we learn afterward." Ryan nodded slowly. The answer was kinder than he expected. Cooper glanced toward Alicia with quiet respect. Many people would have used this moment differently. Many would have chosen humiliation over grace. Alicia chose neither. The sun dipped lower behind the trees, casting long shadows across the driveway. For the first time since the police vehicles arrived, the tension began to fade. Yet deep down, Ryan sensed the most important part of the afternoon had not happened yet. Because there was still one question nobody had answered. Why had the call been made in the first place? And standing across the street, Linda Parker suddenly realized that sooner or later, someone was going to ask exactly that. The question lingered in the air long after Alicia had stopped speaking. Why had the call been made in the first place? Nobody answered immediately. The neighborhood seemed quieter now. The teenagers had gone home. The man with the dog had disappeared down the block. Only a handful of people remained, watching from a distance as the golden light of late afternoon settled across the street. Sergeant Cooper folded his arms thoughtfully. Ryan followed Alicia's gaze across the road until his eyes landed on Linda Parker. The moment she realized several people were looking at her, she shifted uncomfortably. Her fingers tightened around the handle of the watering can beside her feet. For the first time all afternoon, she appeared uncertain. Cooper walked a few steps toward the curb. "Ma'am," he called politely. Linda forced a smile that never fully reached her eyes. "Yes?" Dispatch records show the original call came from this address. The smile vanished. Alicia remained silent beside the garage. Ryan watched carefully. Linda looked from one officer to another. Then toward Alicia. Then quickly away again. "I was only trying to help," she said. "I thought something looked suspicious." Cooper nodded calmly. "What specifically looked suspicious?" Linda hesitated. The pause stretched. The answer seemed much harder to give now than it had been when she first called. "Well," she began slowly, "I saw someone working on a luxury vehicle." Ryan waited. "And?" Linda swallowed. "I had never seen her doing that before." The words sounded weak even to her own ears. Cooper's expression remained neutral. "She has lived here for 7 years. I know that now. The vehicle is registered to her. I know that now too." Another silence followed. The wind moved gently through the trees overhead. Alicia looked toward the Mercedes. Her father used to say that engines revealed problems one part at a time. Human beings often did the same. Cooper spoke again. "Did you see any evidence of criminal activity?" Linda lowered her eyes. "No." "Did you see any sign that the vehicle belonged to someone else?" "No." "Did you witness any damage?" "No." Each answer seemed to grow quieter. Ryan stood motionless. The reality was becoming impossible to ignore. Linda had not reported something she saw. She had reported something she assumed. Alicia felt no satisfaction watching the realization unfold. Only sadness. Because assumptions had a way of creating consequences long before facts arrived. Finally, Linda looked directly at Alicia. I honestly thought I was doing the right thing. Alicia studied her face. There was embarrassment there now. Perhaps even regret. But there was also something deeper. A recognition that her certainty had come from a place she had never fully examined. The sunlight reflected softly across the garage floor as Alicia took a slow breath. Sometimes, she said gently, the difference between concern and assumption is a single question. Nobody spoke after that. The words settled over the street with surprising weight. Ryan lowered his gaze. Cooper nodded thoughtfully. Across the neighborhood, a few remaining spectators quietly returned inside their homes. The story they would tell over dinner would not be about a suspicious person. It would be about a lesson. And standing beside the Mercedes her father had left her, Alicia sensed that the afternoon was finally revealing what it had really been about all along. The neighborhood slowly exhaled. The tension that had gripped the street for most of the afternoon began to loosen, replaced by something quieter and far more uncomfortable. Reflection. Linda stood near her porch with her shoulders slightly lowered. The confidence that had fueled her phone call earlier was gone. In its place sat the unmistakable weight of realization. Alicia looked at her for a moment before turning back toward the open garage. The setting sun painted long bands of amber light across the concrete floor. The old Mercedes seemed to glow beneath the fading sky. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Linda stepped off her porch. The movement immediately drew attention. Ryan watched. Cooper watched. Even a few neighbors lingering near their windows paused to see what would happen next. Linda crossed the street slowly. Each step appeared more difficult than the last. When she finally reached the edge of the driveway, she stopped. Her eyes settled briefly on the photograph resting on the workbench. Then on Alicia. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. The words were not polished. They were not rehearsed. They sounded genuine. Alicia remained still. Linda swallowed. I thought I understood what I was seeing. She looked down at her hands. The truth is, I never asked a single question. The breeze shifted through the neighborhood, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Somewhere nearby, a garage door closed. Ordinary sounds continued while something important unfolded in the driveway. Alicia studied Linda carefully. Years of legal work had taught her how to recognize excuses. This was not an excuse. It was accountability. There was a difference. Thank you for saying that, Alicia replied. Linda blinked, almost surprised by the gentleness of the response. You are not angry? Alicia glanced toward the photograph of her father. A faint smile touched her face. Anger is easy, she said. Understanding takes more work. The answer seemed to land deeply. Linda looked away for a moment, visibly emotional. Ryan shifted his weight and stepped forward. Ms. Brooks, he said. I would also like to apologize. Alicia turned toward him. The young officer stood straighter now, but there was humility in his posture. I arrived believing I already knew the story, he admitted. I should have started with facts instead of assumptions. Sergeant Cooper nodded slightly. It was not easy for people to admit mistakes publicly. Especially mistakes that challenged how they saw themselves. Alicia folded the shop towel and placed it neatly beside her toolbox. Then learn from it, she said. That is all any of us can do. The simplicity of the answer surprised everyone. No lectures. No threats. No attempt to embarrass anyone. Just a lesson delivered with dignity. The sunlight continued sinking toward the horizon. Shadows stretched across the driveway. Ryan looked around the neighborhood differently now. Not as a place filled with potential suspects. As a community filled with people whose stories he did not yet know. Cooper offered Alicia a respectful nod. The department is fortunate people like you choose public service. Alicia smiled softly. Public service works best when everyone remembers who it is supposed to serve. Nobody argued with that. For a moment, the driveway felt less like the scene of a misunderstanding and more like a classroom where everyone had learned something important. And as the last golden rays touched the rooflines across the street, the afternoon's conflict quietly transformed into something far more valuable than being right. It became an opportunity to become better. The last police vehicle pulled away just as the sun disappeared behind the line of oak trees at the end of the street. Its taillights faded into the evening, leaving behind a neighborhood that felt quieter than before. Alicia stood alone in her driveway for a moment, listening. The distant chirp of crickets had begun. A gentle breeze moved through the branches overhead. The tension that had filled the afternoon was gone now, carried away with the fading daylight. Across the street, porch lights flickered on one by one. Windows glowed softly against the approaching night. Life was returning to normal. Yet something had changed. Not only for Ryan. Not only for Linda. For everyone who had watched. Alicia stepped back into the garage and rested her hand against the side of the Mercedes. The metal still held warmth from the sun. She looked at the photograph on the workbench once more. Her father's smile seemed almost alive in the amber light spilling from a single overhead bulb. She could almost hear his voice. Calm. Steady. Certain. The kind of voice that never demanded attention because it never needed to. Her eyes drifted toward the engine. Earlier that day she had been replacing a worn component. The job remained unfinished. She smiled softly. Some things took patience. Some things required people to slow down and look deeper before they understood what they were seeing. The lesson applied to engines. It applied to people too. A few minutes later, a movement across the street caught her. Attention. Ryan had returned on foot. No flashing lights. No urgency. Just a young officer standing near the sidewalk. He hesitated before offering a small respectful nod. Alicia returned it. No words were exchanged. None were necessary. Sometimes growth announced itself quietly. Sometimes the most meaningful apologies were carried forward through actions rather than speeches. Ryan turned and continued down the sidewalk until he disappeared around the corner. Alicia watched him go. Then she reached up and pressed the garage door button. The familiar hum filled the space. Slowly, the large door began descending. As it lowered, the outside world narrowed into a shrinking frame. The houses. The street. The evening sky. Everything gradually slipped from view. The last thing visible before the door closed completely was the photograph resting on the workbench beside the old toolbox. A father who taught his daughter to work hard. A daughter who learned that dignity never needed permission from anyone else. The door settled shut with a soft click. Silence followed. Not the silence of embarrassment. Not the silence of conflict. The silence of understanding. Outside, the neighborhood settled into another ordinary evening. Inside, Alicia picked up her wrench and returned to work. The engine waited patiently beneath the open hood. The world beyond the garage would continue making assumptions. It always had. It always would. But inside that pool of warm light, surrounded by memories, tools, and the lessons that shaped her life, Alicia remained exactly who she had been before the police arrived. And somehow, that was the most powerful ending of all.